It started with me waking up one day with a sore throat and throbbing head. I couldn't pinpoint what the cause was. I thought it was due to seasonal change and tried to go about my day, praying that the pain wouldn't worsen. Luckily, it went off by its own by evening, and I felt really relieved, but it returned the next day. The pain in my throat more intense than the last time. I thought I had caught cold and took some medicine to help ease the pain. It seemed to work, and the pain seemed to lessen, but then I started having nightmares. A hazy hand would try to choke me. I couldn't see the face of my attacker nor where I was, but I could feel them choking me. I could feel the air leaving my body and blood rushing towards my face. It was all very painful. But what terrified me the most was that I was frozen in my place, unable to defend myself, unable to do anything as my attacker choked me. I woke up in the middle of the night one day. I was literally bathed in sweat. I had the same painful and intense nightmare. It was worse than any nightmare I had ever had. It hadn't worried me before, but now I had started thinking maybe it just wasn't a nightmare. It was too real, too intense to be dismissed as a nightmare. The pain in my throat, the throbbing in my head, were all signs of something more sinister, and I decided I couldn't take chances and risk my life. So I decided to investigate. I checked my doors and windows, any sign that someone had broken into my home, but I didn't find what I was looking for. As much as I hated to dismiss it, I had to let go of the idea that someone had broken into my home. But then I was left wondering what was really going on. Was I going mad? Or was I stressed? And the stress was resulting in me having those nightmares. I could find no concrete answers, so I decided to keep a night watch. Half of my mind thought it was a wild idea and I was going too far, but the other half agreed with me, and I decided to go with the latter half. 3 hours passed and my night watch continued, but nothing happened. Everything was still as a pond. The stillness was starting to become eerie, but nothing unusual happened. I was starting to become sleepy, and even coffee wasn't much help. I was nearly about to fall asleep when the light bulb flickered and went off. It jolted me awake, and I went and checked it. It wasn't working. As I switched on another light, it flickered and went off too. I couldn't understand what was happening. I sat down on the couch, terrified. My body froze in fear. It was just like the nightmare, and I wished nothing unusual would happen anymore. But I guess my prayers went unanswered because I felt a sensation around my throat. It was as if someone had placed a hand on my throat, but that wasn't the end. The sensation grew stronger until I couldn't breathe. I wanted to lift my hand, do anything to defend myself, but my body remained paralyzed with fear. As I thought this is the end, and felt guilty for going down without any struggle, the sensation ceased, and it felt as if someone slammed me onto the floor. My head hit the carpet, and I gasped for breath. I was in a lot of pain and coughing badly, but I was able to breathe and felt grateful for that. Whatever was behind it decided to spare my life. Maybe it was a warning, and I decided to take it. I decided to stay at a friend's house and planned to sell my house. Nothing happened for the first few days. The only trouble I had was in not finding any buyer for the house, but I was alive and healthy, and I didn't have the courage to go back to my house. Everything was returning back to normal when I woke up with a large scratch on my arm. It looked as if I had been attacked by a wild animal. My friend was as shocked as I was, and I decided to go back to my house despite my friend pleading with me to not go back. I didn't want whatever it was to mess with my friend. I knew I was making a stupid decision and my heart trembled with fear, but I saw no other choice and went back. I had sleepless nights. I slept with all the lights on, but nothing unusual happened until I saw scratches on my neck. I don't know what it is. I'm so scared and I don't know what to do. I see no options. I have to let whatever it is to keep messing with me. I am so helpless, but there is no way out of it. Having to spend your nights awake and your days asleep is not made for everyone. This hasn't been a problem for me as a kid since I never managed to fall asleep at night and ended up sleeping during class. I lost count of how many times I woke up to my teacher shouting my name and my classmates staring at me. When I turned 16, I had to start thinking about what career I wanted to pursue. Because I usually am wide awake at night, I figured I could become a security guard who works the night shift. I look intimidating as I am tall and often go to the gym, so my sole appearance would tell people not to try and mess with me. Although, in fact, I'm not as tough and strong as I look. That being said, it appears my experience in the field has led me to quite a unique job opportunity. My boss approached me and asked if I was interested in guarding a hospital for 3 days. He mentioned the job would pay exceptionally well compared to my previous jobs, as it requires experience and a trustworthy person. The opportunity of working in a hospital has not yet been offered to me during my time working here, and it seemed like quite the challenge. If I managed to fulfill the job as expected, it might also result in a salary increase. I accepted the offer wholeheartedly, as declining would be foolish. I remember my boss looking relieved upon hearing my response. Supposedly, he struggled to find any other security guards willing to take on the job. "You will start next week on Thursday. Make sure to be there before 10 p.m., he said, shaking my hand. I shook his hand with a huge smile on my face, ecstatic to get started. "You bet, sir." In the days leading up to the assignment, I guarded a few uneventful shifts at various places, such as a university and a McDonald's. I was happy, however, when the day of the unique opportunity arrived. Not wanting to be late, I drove to the hospital around 8 p.m. It's only a 30-minute ride, but you never know what might happen. I also figured getting to know the place wasn't such a bad idea. I mean, how am I supposed to guard a building I don't know the layout of? I didn't want to screw this up, as it pays me 3x what I usually make. It was surprisingly busy on the road, which led me to arrive at the hospital around 8:40 p.m. I got out of my car and made my way to the front door. The building seemed medieval, as it was made from bricks and had this Romanesque charm. The building wasn't big, in fact, it's rather small. From the outside, it seemed the building has 3 floors with short hallways. I pushed the front door open and greeted the lady at the counter. Her smile radiated a welcoming, soothing feeling, easing me of any nerves in an instant. "Hello. I believe I was hired for the night shift at this hospital. I'm a bit early, though. I was supposed to start 10 p.m. "What's your name, darling?" she asked, maintaining her inviting smile. "I'm Jake," I replied confidently. She started typing on the PC in front of her, seemingly checking whether I was speaking the truth. I mean, you never can be too sure. Some crazy people would pretend to be a night shift security guard. "Is your boss Michael?" "Yes, ma'am." "All right. One of the other security guards will be here shortly to explain the procedures. Would you like a cup of coffee in the meantime?" "I would love a cup of coffee. Could it be black?" I asked with a grateful face. She chuckled and left to get me my coffee. A few minutes later, she returned with a cup of coffee. It tasted amazing, unlike I've tasted before. Everything seemed to fall right in line, because a security guard approached me right as I finished my coffee. The security guard looked at me with skeptical eyes, judging my appearance before saying, "You must be the security guard, huh? I didn't expect someone so young to show up for the job, but that doesn't matter if you do as I say." I got out of my chair and held out my hand to shake his hand. "Nice to meet you, sir. I assume you will be showing me around?" I asked confidently. I was always taught that it's important to look confident even though you might not feel confident, as it leaves a positive impression on the people you work for. However, the security guard in front of me, 6'7" and quite the physique, made it difficult for me to not feel intimidated. "Follow me," he ordered. I followed him, and we made our way to the security room. He proceeded to show me how the cameras operate and gave me a tour around the building. He told me some basic security rules which I've heard too many times. "Oh, there's one last thing," he mentioned as he was leaving. "You see that paper on the desk? Read it. It contains a list of rules that you must follow. If you don't, we'll know. I hope you are professional enough to take them seriously and follow them, no matter how bizarre they might seem." I looked at him dumbfounded, but swiftly regained my composure and assured him I would follow the rules. "Good luck, kid," he said as he left the room. I watched him leave as the clock positioned above the door told me that it was 9:30 p.m., which meant I had 30 more minutes before my shift officially started. The paper stated a total of 7 rules. Rule 1. Your shift will begin at 10 p.m. Make sure that you are inside the security room by that time. From 10:15 p.m. until 11 p.m., you are required to patrol the building to ensure that no individuals are present. If you encounter anyone, kindly ask them to leave. Rule 2. Somewhere between 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., a young woman could appear, knocking on the front door asking to see her husband. Ignore her completely and pretend she isn't there until she goes away. Rule 3. Ensure that the lights inside the intensive care unit remain on throughout your shift. If they happen to turn off, make your way over there and turn them back on. If you hear screaming while the lights are off, run towards the nearest bathroom and stay there until the screaming stops, then proceed to turn the lights on. Rule 4. If there's a little girl with a teddy bear in the cafeteria, sit next to her and don't say a word. If she looks at you, walk back to the security room. If she speaks to you, talk back until she leaves. Rule 5. Around 1 a.m., go to the general ward and check on the patients. If one seems to be sitting on their bed, ask them if they're okay and do whatever they request. If they strike a conversation besides this, ignore it. Rule 6. If it starts raining, open the front door and let people in for shelter. Make sure everyone you let inside leave the building. If someone seems to be missing, you will see them on the security cameras. Do not look at them. Rule 7. If the security cameras were to turn off any time throughout the night, hide and pray for your life they won't find you. I put the paper back down on the desk and leaned back in the chair. I laughed at the sheer bizarreness of the situation. I must be getting pranked. I thought to myself, though deep down, I did not believe it was a prank. This was in fact a hospital, and it seemed unlikely my boss would go to such lengths for a joke. Perhaps this was his way of seeing how much he could trust me, to see if I would follow such foolish rules. I reread the rules once again to make sure I understood them. I sure as hell was going to show my boss that he can count on me. The clock struck 10 p.m., and I turned my attention to the security cameras. With not much happening on the security cameras, and only having 15 minutes until I was supposed to patrol, I felt my attention slowly falling towards my phone. The best way to waste your time. Spending time looking at memes and stupid internet news sure does go by quickly. It felt like I barely had spent time on my phone, yet it was already 10:15 p.m. I left my cozy chair, stretched my legs, and made my way out of the security room. I figured that starting at the highest floor and descending my way down would be the best course of action, so I made my way to the highest floor. Thankfully there was an elevator, so I did not have to bother using the stairs. I made my way up the highest floor and started checking all the rooms, hallways, and even the bathrooms. As I expected, nothing special happened. The thing about working the night shift as a security guard is mostly that someone must be at the location in case something happens. However, this does not mean anything will happen, making it a boring, easy way to earn money. On top of that, I get to grab coffee and snacks whenever I want. No one seemed to be on the 3rd floor, so I decided to descend to the 2nd floor of the building. After patrolling the 2nd floor, I reached the conclusion I had set for myself beforehand. Nothing special. I grabbed my phone to check the time and see if I needed to hurry. It was 10:32 p.m. when I finished the 2nd floor, giving me enough time to explore the 1st floor. It did strike me as weird, however, that there was literally no one in the hospital. I expected a hospital to always have doctors and patients in the building, as that's the entire point of a hospital. However, every room I checked so far has been empty. If my boss was indeed trying to test me, he did not go all in on the preparations. Despite that, I proceeded to the 1st floor, which contained the intensive care unit, security room, front door, and cafeteria. I planned to pass through the ICU and main hall area first, so I could finish off with the cafeteria and get myself a snack. As I made my way through the ICU, I was caught by surprise when I noticed an old man around 70 years old standing in one of the rooms. Wonderstruck for a bit, I recalled rule number 1. If you encounter anyone, kindly ask them to leave. Suddenly, everything fell into place. I realized that my boss had likely hired an actor and allowed him inside the building to test my adherence to the rules. With a sigh, I made my way toward the man. "Excuse me, sir. You are not supposed to be here at this time. I would like to kindly ask you to leave," I firmly asserted to the old man. The old man looked at me without saying a word, appearing confused by what I had told him. "Sir, I would kindly like to ask you to leave," I repeated. He nodded his head in agreement and followed me out of the building. "Have a good night, sir," I told him as he walked away. Right before he completely vanished into the darkness, the old man unexpectedly spoke. "Be careful of the surgeon." What did he mean by that? I quickly realized my boss must have told him to say that to scare me, so I quickly disregarded it. I continued my patrol around the floor. No one else seemed to be on the first floor, so I grabbed another cup of coffee and a croissant from the cafeteria. As it was 10:53 p.m., I made my way back to the security room. Once inside, I leaned back in my chair and played some games on my phone, confident no one was in the building, and I had nothing to worry about. After playing games on my phone for a while and finally checking the time, I was surprised to see it was nearly 12 a.m. I had spent over an hour playing games on my phone. I shifted my attention to the security cameras, scanning for any anomalies. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed the lights of the ICU were switched off. I cursed at myself for not paying attention, as I had no idea how long the lights had been switched off, and the rules stated to turn them on as soon as possible. I got out of the security room to turn on the lights. As I walked towards the ICU, I froze in my steps. The sound of people screaming was deafening. I was baffled by the situation, unsure if my boss would have gone this far just to see how far I would follow the rules. The agony in the screams was noticeable and raised my anxiety. That's when I heard a door open and close, followed by footsteps making their way towards my location. Without hesitation, I bolted to the bathroom on the first floor and locked myself in one of the toilets. I tried to gather my composure and make sense of the situation I found myself in. I couldn't seem to understand how it was possible for anyone to even be in the building. Their screams of agony felt so realistic that it left no room to think this was staged by my boss. Those screams were real. Before I could fully reclaim my composure, the bathroom door swung open and the same footsteps I heard before walked inside. I tried to stay as silent as possible, not knowing if the person had a weapon. For a second the silence was deafening, until the person started whispering a song to himself. "Welcome to the hospital, welcome to the hospital, you can come but you can't go. Welcome to the hospital, welcome to the hospital," he murmured as he knocked on the doors of every bathroom stall. I jumped when he knocked on mine, the sound noticeably louder than with the others. Through the gap beneath the door, I could see his feet on the other side, completely motionless. "Is anyone there?" he said with a deranged tone. "Open up, don't be shy," he continued. My heart pounded in my chest as I held on to the silence. I remained frozen, praying he would soon leave me alone so I could get the hell out of here. The man persisted, knocking on the door as attempt to gain any reaction out of me. "Come on, Jake. I need your help with something," he cried out desperately. I felt my blood turn cold at the sound of him mentioning my name, unsure as to how he could have known it. I stayed still and did not make a sound. After a couple of minutes, he gave up and walked out of the bathroom. Right before he left, one more sentence left his mouth. "See you soon, Jake." I did not leave the bathroom for another 10 minutes until the screaming had finally stopped. I unlocked the bathroom stall I was in and slowly opened the door that led towards the main hall, making sure no one was in sight. I exited the bathroom and slowly made my way to the ICU to turn the lights back on. Right after I turned the lights on, I ran towards the security room. as it suddenly felt like the only safe place in the building. As I let myself fall into the cozy chair, I looked at the time displayed on my phone, which indicated 12:51 a.m. Still full of adrenaline of what had just happened, I quickly reread all the rules to see if I had acted the way I was supposed to. Thankfully, that was the case. As I got to Rule 5, I was given a lovely reminder to check up on the patients around 1 a.m. and fulfill any wishes they had. Though I was not too sure if I was ready for another endeavor, I was more afraid of what might happen if I don't oblige to the rules. Despite, during my patrol, I did not see anyone in the patient rooms, so how could there be anyone? I made my way up the stairs, this time reluctant to use the elevator, feeling like it might stop working. Besides, it's only one floor, so I might as well use the stairs. As I stepped on the second floor, my heartbeat started increasing slightly, as I did not know to expect. As I made my way to the patients, I started to hear excessive coughing from one of the rooms. I decided to go past the rooms one by one, to make sure I did not skip any of them. As I peered into the first room, hoping to see nothing except an empty room, I was disappointed. In the bed laid an old woman, apparently sleeping. She had 2 tubes inside her nostrils and a needle in her arm. This is when I realized I hate the sight of people in these conditions. In every room were patients who seemed either extremely sick or extremely wounded. Whilst making my way throughout the hallway, the coughing sound became louder as I slowly made my way towards the source. Of course, it was in the last room. In case it was that maniac in the bathroom from before, I'd have to run the farthest. All the other patients were sleeping. As I made my way to the last and final room, I took a deep breath before walking in. Despite my nervousness, I stepped into the doorway and looked at the man. The man was sitting on the bed, elbow in front of his mouth and coughing like he had been the past few minutes. When he noticed me, he tried to speak. He muttered, trying to stop his coughing. For a second, I was caught off guard. This guy seemed to be an actual patient. I even felt pity for him. I couldn't imagine what it'd be like for him. I quickly ran down to the cafeteria to grab a cup of water and bring it to him. As he saw me standing in the doorway, his hand signaled me to come closer and hand him the cup of water. I walked towards him and handed it to him. He drank it so fast, I figured he had beaten a world record. He collapsed on his bed and thankfully stopped coughing. "Thank you," he exclaimed. "No problem, man. You seemed like you needed it," I replied. After a minute of sitting in the silence with the man, I figured it was time for me to leave the room, as I did what he asked. Besides, he didn't seem to be much of a chatter. He was just happy to have had his water. As I made my way to the door and wanted to grab the handle, he spoke. "Where are you going? Come sit with me, my friend." A chill went down my spine as I heard him speak. His entire tone changed from before, and he sounded serious. I slowly turned my head back to him, realizing I had no choice but to do what he asked. I sat down next to him on the bed. "What's up?" I tried to say confidently, but failing in doing so. "I'm not going to hurt you, son. I appreciate you helping me. You see, the surgeon stuffed a can of cinnamon down my throat, which led me to be unable to breathe. I wanted to tell you to be careful, because he's still wandering the building." "He stuffed cinnamon down your throat?" I asked in disbelief. That's when I remembered what the old man from before had said. "Be careful of the surgeon." "Yes, he did. I wanted to warn you. This seems to be your first time here. I figured you'd like to know there's a maniac inside the building. If you do what the rules say, kid, you'll be fine." I looked at him with fright. After taking a deep breath and standing up, I thanked him and made my way out the room. Thankfully, he did not ask me to come back. I made my way to the security room. My pace increased when I heard something falling on the 3rd floor. In no multiverse would I have gone upstairs to check what was going on there. If I follow the rules, I'd be fine. I grabbed the door handle of the security room and closed it as soon as I was inside. A wave of relief crashed over me as I once again felt safe. When I looked at the clock above the door, it indicated the time was 1:53 a.m. I sat down in the chair and once again read the sheet of paper. Thankfully, there were no more rules stating me to go outside the security room. I prayed to God the rest of the night would be as boring as all my previous jobs had been. I felt relieved knowing my shift ended at 6 a.m., which meant I only had 4 hours left to go. I could tell the events that occurred this eventful night had taken a toll on my energy, as I felt quite exhausted. While staring at the security cameras, I felt my eyelids slowly closing, and my mind drifting away. I fell asleep in the chair, completely forgetting about where I even was to begin with. I woke up around 2:45 a.m. and gave my body and mind some time to adjust to reality, as I had no clue where I was when I woke up. After a short while, I came back to my senses when I realized I was in the middle of a night shift. Awake, though still feeling the effects of waking up, I made my way to the cafeteria to grab myself a cup of coffee. I figured it'd help me stay awake for the rest of the night. I walked into the empty cafeteria and made my way to the coffee machine. I watched the coffee pour into my cup, entertained by the sight of it. As I turned around to go back to the security room, I jumped and spilled the coffee all over my suit. Although no one was in the cafeteria when I walked in, there now was a little girl sitting at one of the tables. Unsure of what the rules exactly said about this occurrence, I tried my best to remember the rules. My train of thought was interrupted once I noticed the little girl had turned around and was now staring at me. She had a small white skirt and a pink t-shirt, and blonde curly hair going just as far as her shoulders. In her hand she held a teddy bear with buttons as eyes, except one of the eyes was hanging on by a thread. She looked at me without any expression on her face, making me feel uncomfortable and uncertain as to what I should do. All I could remember from the rules is that I had to sit next to her. Though I was reluctant and not entirely sure, I felt like it was the safest course of action. In the end, it was only a little girl. I sat next to her, her eyes intently staring at mine. She did not say a word for a long time, and I felt extremely uncomfortable, unsure of when I could leave. That is when she started giggling, covering her mouth with one hand, whilst still holding her teddy bear with the other. "You forgot the rules," she said in a frightening and teasing tone. I looked at her confused, thinking I had remembered them correctly. She could see the panicked look in my eyes, enjoying the sight of it. "Want to play hide and seek?" she excitedly asked. "I'll count to 60 and then we will look for you." I did not bother to ask who "we" was. She looked at me like a kid looks at candy in a candy store. I ran to the security room, leaving my coffee next to the little girl. As I ran away, I could hear her counting. 1, 2, 3, forever with me you'll be. 4, 5, 6, in the darkness you'll cease to exist. I locked myself in the security room and quickly grabbed the rules as I reread Rule 4. If there's a little girl with a teddy bear in the cafeteria, sit next to her and don't say a word. If she looks at you, walk back to the security room. If she speaks to you, talk back until she leaves. My throat turned dry as I realized my mistake. As I realized I had broken one of the rules, I remembered her mentioning hide and seek. That's when suddenly, all the security cameras turned off. Rule 7. If the security cameras were to turn off any time throughout the night, hide and pray for your life, they won't find you. I completely lost it as I did not know what to expect, nor where to hide. All I knew is that the security room was too obvious for me to stay in, as there's no way I could escape from here. Overtaken by adrenaline, it felt like my body was moving on its own. I reached for the front door and frantically tried to open it. The door didn't budge no matter how hard I kicked. 52, 53, 54, 55, prepare to run for your life. The little girl sang from inside the cafeteria. Despite feeling mentally overwhelmed, making me feel dizzy and close to passing out, my body had gotten a mind of its own. I ran up the stairs to the second floor, to the room of the patient I had given a cup of water. I opened the door to his room, only to see he was no longer there. That did not matter to me at that point, however, as I just wanted to find a proper hiding spot. By the time I was inside the room, I could already hear the little girl frantically laughing and singing as she had counted to 60. Unsure of how long I had left before she would be coming to this room, I decided I had to hide as soon as possible. I looked around the room for any suitable hiding spots, but there seemed to be none. The best option I seemed to have was to get inside the ceiling, as it was made from plates that could be pushed up. I stood on the bed to get closer to the ceiling and hopefully pull myself up. I accidentally kicked the photo from the nightstand next to the bed. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed throughout the entire building. "I heard that!" she screamed as I heard her running towards my location. Completely freaked out and realizing I had to be quick, I jumped as high as I could and held onto the ceiling, pulling myself up as fast as I could. I could tell the ceiling wasn't made for any person being on top of it, as every little move I made caused the ceiling to cave. Once I made it up above the ceiling, I blocked off the square hole and laid completely still, not wanting to make a sound or have the chance of the ceiling falling. I could hear the little girl enter the room excitedly, tiptoeing around. "I know you are in here. I heard you drop something," she said in a playful tone, enjoying every second of it. My heartbeat skyrocketed throughout the entirety of the situation, unsure whether she would find me or not. She poked into the ceiling with a broom, trying to figure out if I was there or not. Though I almost jumped once I felt the vibrations of the broom touching the ceiling, I managed to lay still and not make a sound. "I guess you're not here then," she said disappointingly as she walked out of the room and continued to keep searching. I could feel the ceiling giving into my weight, which meant I had to find a different hiding spot. After a couple of minutes, and making sure she was no longer nearby, I slowly descended back into the room, being as quiet as I could. I peered my head into the hallway to see if anyone was there, but no one was in sight. I made my way through the hallway with the smallest steps I could make, flinching at every sound I heard. I figured I should hide on the first floor since she had already checked the entire floor already. Though I did not know exactly where she was, I figured she would be upstairs. I slowly made my way downstairs, making sure no one was there. As I heard her shoes touching the floor above me, I knew I was safe to walk on the first floor for a while. This seemed to be a horrible conclusion because the moment I turned the corner, I could see the silhouette of a man standing near the ICU. I could see his face turn to me. I quickly jumped behind the wall, hoping he had not seen me. "What is a patient of mine doing out of his room so late?" the man asked. Realizing I did not have long before he would be here, I had two options. My first option was to go back upstairs and hope I would not encounter the girl, and maybe find a hiding spot there. The second option was to run to the bathroom once again in hopes I'd be safe there. I didn't like either of those options, as I felt either of them would lead to me getting caught. Though I did not feel like I had the time to go back upstairs at all, I quickly ran towards the bathroom. Right before I wanted to enter the bathroom, I noticed the janitor's closet right underneath the stairs. Feeling like it's my best chance of survival, I opened the door and hid myself behind a container and a pile of trash bags. "Come on now, I need to inspect your organs," the man proclaimed as I heard him open the bathroom door. His voice sounded familiar, but at first I did not seem to understand why. That was until he finished searching the bathroom. "You were smart enough to hide somewhere else this time. I'm impressed you are not as stupid as you look," he said as I realized who he was. The guy sounded exactly like the maniac I had encountered before. My blood froze to the fact that he knew where I was all along. He opened the janitor closet and looked around for a bit, but decided it was too small for someone to hide in, so he closed it soon after, leaving me in utter darkness, horrified to do anything. I stayed in there for the rest of the night, not getting out until I knew it was completely safe. I could hear a drill, followed by a man screaming in agony. The man, who I assumed was the surgeon, laughed maniacally. I grabbed my phone to see how long I had left until the nightmare was over. 5:45 a.m. Only 15 minutes left until the staff of the hospital would come in for their daily shift. I just had to hold on for a little bit longer. I ended up falling asleep in the closet, feeling completely hopeless and defeated, exhausted from the night I had witnessed. I was woken up by a kind old man who seemed to be the janitor, who seemed surprised to see a security guard hiding behind his equipment. "Rough night?" he asked, though he knew the answer based on my expression. "It's over. You can come out now." I got back on my feet and walked back into the hallway. The hospital looks completely different during the day than it does at night. Instead of being unsettling, it seemed like a nice place. I thanked the janitor for his kindness and got the hell out of that place. I drove home and collapsed on my bed. I still could not comprehend what I had witnessed. It all felt like a fever dream. I told my boss I was sick and did not bother to answer his phone calls. After a week, I returned to my regular, uneventful shifts. Though the boredom might be horrible, I do not mind it at all. In the end, anything is better than having to spend the night in that hospital. There is a pond on the edge of my town behind a large willow. I've never seen it being used. I've never seen a duck swimming in it, or even leaves or other sea creatures, let alone people taking a bath or just dipping their feet in it. Every time I passed by the pond, it was like walking past a ghost town. It was eerie to see how deserted it was, how the water surface remained still and smooth as glass, even during windy weather conditions. But despite the strange power emanating from it, I couldn't help but admire its purity and beauty. When I stopped in front of the pond with my bike for the first time, my gaze was captivated. I stared at the oval outline, the reflection of the surface, the plants growing on the bank, and the dusk that shone colorfully on the horizon and rounded off the beauty of the pond. I'm sure I sound crazy for wasting so much time and emotion describing a pond. Even my parents thought I was crazy when I raved about it one night at the dinner table. But it's important that I tell you about it, considering what happened 3 weeks ago. I was on my way to school when I saw an ambulance drive past me. It was heading straight for the edge of town and turned into the grassy area where the willow was. I didn't think anything of it at first and went to school as normal. In the afternoon, during the last lesson, we were all surprised when our school principal made an announcement and said that we should watch out on the way home or have our parents pick us up. That was all that was said. On the way out, I heard students everywhere throwing around theories and rumors. I often heard missing student, disappeared, and murdered. But there were also really nonsensical things, so I didn't pay any attention to them at first. My father came and picked me up just to be sure. I was surprised because he was still supposed to be at work and would only pick me up in the worst-case scenario. However, I dismissed it as a good gesture from a parent and didn't think much of it. I was a little worried about my girlfriend Rachel, though, because she would probably expect me to take her home. But my father insisted that I get into the car without arguing. I did as I was told. When I brought up the subject of the principal's announcement at the dinner table that evening, everyone suddenly became quiet. My parents looked at each other worriedly. I sat up curiously and asked, "Do you know more about it? Does it have something to do with the ambulance this morning?" My mother sipped her tea and said, "It turns out that student from your school went missing this morning. It is believed that he was kidnapped because his bag was found, but I don't think that's enough evidence." I swallowed hard and finally asked where the bag was found. My mother replied that it happened on the outskirts of the town next to the big willow. I would like to justify myself and make it clear that I was 16 years old at the time and still in the phase where I would try anything. If someone had bet me that I could ride a skateboard across a dilapidated bridge, I probably would have done it. My thirst for adventure was too great for that. When I finally found out that someone had disappeared at the pond, I knew I had to go to the scene myself. Luckily, there was no school the next day, so I rode my bike to the outskirts of town. I had told my parents I would stop by Rachel's house and check on them. They were still fresh out of bed, so they probably weren't too concerned about it. But I also felt bad that I hadn't gone to visit Rachel, so I decided to go to her house straight after my explorations. When I arrived at the pond, I saw that the crime scene had been removed. There was no bag, and the whole area around the willow was as green and unused as ever. I saw no change at the pond either. It couldn't be possible that the missing student was in the water, otherwise he would have been found immediately. I dared to step onto the bank and take a closer look. The water was clearer than the sky could ever be and offered a clear view of what was happening in the ground. Here and there, roots were sticking out, and you could see loose rocks that had probably been thrown in. Otherwise, the entire ground was just sand. Sand, like in a desert. Wavy, hilly, and smooth. Almost untouched. The view of the pond was simply majestic. I had the urge to reach in and see if the water would feel as great on my skin, but I was stopped by a loud scream in the background. I pulled my hand away and turned around. A person emerged from behind the willow. She was about my age, well-dressed, and her brown hair looked like she had been combing it 100 times non-stop. Rachel. She came straight up to me and raised her finger like a strict teacher. "Where have you been yesterday? A classmate went missing and I had to walk home alone? Is that how you treat your girlfriend?" Rachel has always been very hot-tempered and could be quite bossy, but at that moment I was overcome with shame. I really should have gone to see her the day before and walked her home. I really didn't know what I was thinking. I apologized to Rachel and was about to embrace her, but she pushed me away. "You can make it up to me by taking me home now. But first, you stop at the mall and get me something." I nodded vigorously and promised to make it up to her. I hated acting like that, but Rachel just had this power that made you feel bad for yourself. My mother had brought it up to me once, but I didn't want to listen to her because I had just gotten together with Rachel, and I was head over heels in love with her. "What are you even doing here?" Rachel asked. I had completely forgotten why I was here at that moment, but I didn't want to tell her about the connection I possibly found between the pond and the missing student because she would think I was crazy. So I just told her that I was here to feed the ducks. Rachel laughed. "There aren't even ducks here. This pond has been just a decoration for ages, so the lawn doesn't look so deserted. But it's so beautiful. You have to look at it and see how clear it is," I said, a little too excited for my liking. Rachel eyed me confusedly too. Without raising her eyebrows any further, I instead took her hand and led her to the shore. I asked her to take a look, which she did. "Don't you see how clear the water is? As if you're looking into a portal where a beautiful desert landscape is visible, right?" I thought Rachel would at least understand what I was trying to say or just shrug her shoulders and leave, but her reaction was more than surprising. She frowned and recoiled slightly, as if she had seen something strange. "What's that?" she said, stammering. Then she looked at me. "Is this some kind of joke?" I stood there rooted to the spot, feeling guilty for some reason. I knew it was just Rachel's persuasive ability to make me feel bad, but I was genuinely curious as to what she was getting at. "Can't you see that?" she asked, louder this time. I did as she told me and looked into the water too, albeit a little hesitantly, eager to see what had frightened her so much. But I saw nothing, just the clear water with the sandy bottom. I told Rachel I didn't see anything, and she hit me on the head. "Don't act like that. Of course you can see it." She turned back to the surface and screamed at her own reflection. "No, stop that! I've said you must stop. Now!" I felt a mixture of confusion and panic. I really didn't know what Rachel was doing, but at that moment, all I cared about was her well-being. Her behavior came out of nowhere, and was so strange that I really wondered if she was still the Rachel I had come to know and love. Just as I was about to grab her and pull her away from the edge, something happened that would haunt me for the rest of my life like a recurring nightmare. Rachel reached for the water as if she wanted to attack it and sank into the pond. Even though the area near the bank was less than 3 feet deep, I couldn't see her when she hit the surface. The water was crystal clear. Panicking, I dug my hands into the water and searched for my girlfriend. I couldn't feel any hands, feet, or even a strand of her hair. She didn't make a sound. Aside from my hands splashing in the water and my desperate screams, the pond was dead silent. I jumped inside, stopped thinking about the mysterious strength of the pond, and dug my hands and feet deep into the sand, searching in vain for Rachel. The sand felt incredibly on my skin. After 20 minutes I had waited, thought the entire pond, and had no luck. Rachel was gone. I got out of the pond and sobbed. I didn't know what to do. My only thought was how Rachel's parents would take the news that their daughter had disappeared without a trace. I still hoped that she would mysteriously turn up somewhere. I didn't care how unlikely it seemed. I wanted to hold on to that tiny spark of hope. I got on my bike and hurried away from the pond, away from the willow. My mind, however, worked on its own and made my head turn back once more. Despite the great distance I had covered, the pond was still clearly in my field of vision, piercing my heart with its heavenly appearance. After the incident with Rachel at the pond, everything that came afterwards happened so quickly. I told Rachel's parents about her disappearance, trying to explain everything as plausibly as possible without mentioning that the pond had literally swallowed her. I also left myself out of the picture and limited my part to a random witness so that the investigation would not target me. It hurt my heart, but it was for the best. All of this happened 3 weeks ago, and Rachel is still missing. She has never been seen since the incident at the pond. Going to school became a nightmare. All I heard was Rachel's name. There were many expressions of condolence. Many of her friends came to me, hugged me, and assured me that would return safely, which I strongly doubted. But I also heard very negative voices about Rachel's absence, that she deserved it, that the world would be better off without her, etc. I had seen this coming because Rachel didn't exactly have a good reputation among us students. I ignored the people as best I could, and with each passing day the excitement died down a little. The school dedicated a day to commemorate the events. This has never happened before, but it was a very special case, as 2 students had disappeared at the same time. I also finally found out who the first missing student was, and I was actually a little relieved when I heard his name. His name is Riley, and he is one of those students who thinks it's cool to bully others. He has often caused younger students to see the nurse, and has never been seriously punished for it. I would have at least been somewhat understanding of his behavior if he had had a difficult home life. But I've heard from friend that he grew up in wealthy circles, and his parents are the kind of people who defend their child at all costs. So, it was no surprise when they recently planned to sue our school for poor protection measures. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but I don't see much hope for Riley's parents. Now Rachel and Riley were gone. Both were victims of an extraordinary perpetrator. And now, I have only one question. What did they see in the pond that sealed their fate, and why couldn't I see it? Today, I rode my bike up to the willow again, simply because my instinct told me to. But I didn't get very far because the pond was fenced off with barrier tape. At least it wouldn't claim any more victims in the future. I've always been a rather rational person and never believed in things like karma. But lately I've been hearing this word from a lot of people, even from my mother. I try to ignore it as much as I can, but there's a part of my mind that just wouldn't stop telling me that Rachel has always been a bad person and a horrible girlfriend. The screams echoed through the trees. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. All I knew was they were loud, which meant they were close. As I listened to the high-pitched shrieks, it almost sounded like a couple of people having a shouting match. If I had been at my apartment in town, that's exactly what I would have thought the sound was. But then the pitch changed, and it took on a feral quality. I knew whoever or whatever was making the sound, I wanted nothing to do with them. Thinking you're alone in the wilderness is one thing. It gives a certain freeing feeling like you're so close to nature. but knowing you're alone and hearing the terrifying, nearly indescribable sound sent chills down my spine. I quickly questioned how much longer I would be alone, or alive. Did those things know I was here? Were they planning their attack? Or was it just a gathering of something like a harmless chill session in the woods, in the dead of night? Survival instinct was screaming for me to get out of there as quickly as possible. To hell with the tent and my supplies, just leave. For a brief moment, I nearly listened. Later, I would wish I had. Fortunately, I hadn't made a fire yet and decided against one now. If by some miracle those things didn't know I was here, the fire would draw them in like flies to, well, something I didn't want to be in. Even though the screaming was still going at a fever pitch, I quietly snuck into my tent and zipped it shut, as if some flimsy material would magically keep at bay whatever beasts were raging out there. Searching through my pack, I found my Swiss Army knife and kept it firm in my grasp as I lay down on my sleeping bag. I didn't dare settle in for the night, sleeping through being attacked by wild whatevers and torn to shreds can be bad for my health. As I lay there, eyes wide, listening to the horrible shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere, they suddenly stopped. At first, this was a relief, but when the sound stopped, so did all other noises of the forest. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on all of nature. I heard a loud thumping sound that sounded like drums beating faster and faster until I realized it was my heart. Trying to calm myself so I didn't have a heart attack on the spot was a challenge. I tried to think of calm blue oceans and sunrises, of beautiful things that had nothing to do with the situation I was in. Apparently, I did my job too well. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in a panic. Jumping up, I looked all around for the beasts that were coming to get me. When all that stared back at me were the contents of my backpack and the four walls of the tent, I allowed myself to take a few deep breaths. It was morning. The sun was up and the birds were singing. I took both of those as good signs. Being alive was a bonus as well. It was decision time. Do I pack up and cut my trip short by 2 days, or do I write off last night's incident as a rare occurrence and not worry about it today in the daylight as the sun's rays bathed me in warmth? It's funny how fear manifests itself so much stronger at night. Last night the forest seemed like the most horrifying place I'd ever been. Today it looks like all the beauty of nature is spread out before me. I couldn't imagine anything bad happening in such a picturesque place. As I looked out over the clearing in the woods, I saw a large, dark spot that was moving towards me. I dove into my tent and emerged with a pair of binoculars. Peering through them, I saw the spot was a bear, and it was headed my way. So much for nothing bad happening in nature. My plan of action was to hide and hope it went away, or turn down another path before it got here. That plan didn't work out so well. Within 15 minutes, I could hear it snuffling around the campsite looking for something to eat. I hoped it wouldn't be eating fresh camper. The can of bear spray was firmly in my hand with my white knuckles clenching it. Having it was one thing, using it was another. That was my last resort. Spray and run. The sniffing got louder, and I could see the bottom edges of tent being pushed in by a large nose. My knuckles grew a little whiter as I followed its progress along the edge and around the tent. And then there was a pause, a dreadful pause, the kind of pause that horrible decisions are born from. I was contemplating my own horrible decision when the sniffing started again, this time leading away from the tent. Breathing a cautiously optimistic sigh of relief, I opened the tent flap just enough to see the bear lumbering off into the woods. Again, I held a silent vote, just like the song said. Should I stay or should I go? I'd only been camping up here once before, but I didn't remember it being this dangerous. Maybe I just got lucky last time. Not wanting my luck to run out, I packed up my tent and got ready to leave. The sun was already high in the sky, leaving me just a few hours to hike out what took me a full day to hike in. I looked for bear tracks to see which way it had left, but the ground was dry, so there was nothing to see. Crossing my fingers, I headed out on the trail, hoping it had gone some other way. It was easy going. making the terror of last night fade even more. I still kept a wary eye for the bear, though. No use in getting so caught up in nature that I ignore her dangers. After around an hour of walking, I found a large rock on the side of the trail and decided to take a break. Pulling out a granola bar and a bottle of water, I looked around as I snacked. There was a clearing in the woods and a rough path leading to it. It wasn't any official path, just one that happens when a lot of feet go the same way and tramp down the foliage. There was a faint whiff of smoke coming from the clearing, but I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. My curiosity wanted to see what was there, but my common sense said no way. In the end, curiosity fought dirty and said the smoke meant there had been a fire, and the ashes could blow into the trees if the wind picked up and cause a wildfire. It was a good point, even though the wind was uncannily still at the moment. I took a quick look around to make sure the bear wasn't sneaking up on me, then started down the narrow path. The trees blocked out some of the light as I headed down the path toward the clearing, making me literally descend into darkness. It wasn't a good feeling. My eyes darted around, looking for anything out of the ordinary, and I slowed my pace. Then suddenly, the trees opened up, and daylight shone brightly on the clearing, and the remnants of a fire with a wisp of smoke still rising. Whoever had made it had been dangerously uncaring about the safety of the woods. The fire sat right in the middle of a patch of grass, with no ring of stone surrounding it. My ire rose at the carelessness of this person. I found myself wishing very bad things on them when I noticed something else. There were splotches of red all around the fire. It was like someone had spilled red paint all around. It was strange. Why would someone bring paint out here to the middle of the woods? I stalked around the other side of the fire, looking for the answer to this mystery. Unfortunately, I found it. There was something pale sitting just outside the burnt grass of the fire. It was next to a splotch of red. I bent down and moved the grass to see more clearly. Picking it up, I saw it was a severed human toe. I dropped it and stood up like a shot. The red splotches made sense to me now. They weren't paint, they were blood. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt very alone and surrounded. My eyes darted all around the clearing and into the trees as I did a slow circle, searching for whatever was about to attack. As I searched, I saw the red splotches led off into the woods in the opposite direction of the trail. Curiosity tried to get me to follow, but I told it to shut the hell up and hightailed it out of there, my head on a swivel searching for threats. Just as I was about to reach the main trail, I literally ran into the bear. I'd been so busy watching behind me for whatever might be chasing me that I didn't see what was in front of me. It turned to face me, showing its red teeth. Then it stood on its hind legs, dwarfing me, and roared. I wished I'd worn the brown pants because I soiled myself in fear. I was so terrified I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. It dropped back down onto its front legs and approached me, teeth bared. I knew right then it was responsible for the screams and the dismembered toe. The only thing I couldn't figure out was the fire. I'd never heard of bears being able to start a fire. This was unfortunately the last thought going through my head before being eaten. It sniffed and took a step back. If I'd known dropping a load in my pants would save me, I would have done it last night. As I looked into the eyes of my death, it wasn't looking back at me. It was looking past me. I wasn't sure what kind of trick this bear was pulling. It wasn't like it had to fool me or anything. It had me dead to rights. Curiosity made me turn and follow the bear's gaze. I instantly regretted it. Standing near the clearing was a monster. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It stood on hind legs, at least 8 feet tall. It had the horns of a deer, but the face looked like a deer's skull with no skin on it. Its shoulders were covered in what looked like a cloak made of another animal's skin. The bear let out a deep growl full of menace. I took the opportunity to back away and allow the bear a clear path to its adversary. It glanced at me for a moment, then started toward the monster. As soon as it was past me, I dropped my pack and ran down the trail with every ounce of speed I could muster. It didn't matter that my car was miles away. It didn't matter, there was no way I could sprint all the way there without collapsing and having a heart attack. Just then, I heard the fight. The growling, roaring, slashing, knocking trees down. Fight that would have been awesome to watch. From inside a bunker with 2-foot-thick concrete walls. Just me, alone, without a rocket launcher to defend myself. There was no way I was sticking around. I ran for a solid 10 minutes before the stitch in my side told me I had to at least slow to a walk. I didn't dare stop. I knew I had to keep moving. It was my only chance of surviving by some miracle. The sounds of the fight echoed throughout the trees, making it seem surreal to hear it, then hear it echo back again. It sounded like the fight was slowing down. I hoped it would last for a while longer. Maybe whichever one would forget about me or be too tired to track me down. My walk had become a limp. I was nearly out of energy and had a mile to go to the relative safety of my car. Surely by now I could take it easy. As the thought rolled through my brain, the sounds of the fight ceased. The fading echo was all that remained. I wondered which one had been victorious and comforted myself that the victor was surely enjoying the spoils by feasting on the fallen adversary. But in the back of my mind, unease grew. What if it didn't forget me? What if it was following me right now? I found myself walking a little faster, much to the pain and chagrin of my legs. The silence that fell in the aftermath of the fight was disconcerting. The animals around me that had been chattering away, suddenly falling silent, was alarming. I started jogging, each step a new exercise in pain. There was no doubt I was being followed. The footsteps behind me were getting louder by the moment. My car was in sight. I was almost free. The footsteps behind me were very loud now. I knew it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. "Run! Don't think, just run!" my thoughts screamed at me. Even my curiosity had no desire to look back. 10 steps from the car, I dug in my pocket looking for my keys. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't find them. Then I dug a little deeper and came away with my prize. I hit the remote to unlock the car and dove into the driver's seat. The engine had just roared to life when the monster appeared. I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, whipping around and making the monster miss, crashing through the windshield. I jammed it into drive and floored it as the monster recovered and started after me. For a long, horrid moment, it seemed to be catching up to me. The road was gravel and had several potholes in it. I found myself swerving to miss the biggest ones so my car wouldn't bottom out. But by doing so, the monster gained ground. It was almost within reach of my rear bumper when I slid sideways onto the main road. Once on the pavement, I floored it and watched with satisfaction as the monster fell behind. I breathed a sigh of relief as I relaxed and settled in for the ride home. It wasn't long until I was pulling into my driveway and parking. My head fell back against the headrest and I was tempted to take a nap right there when my nose reminded me of the state of my pants. Walking in empty-handed was a mixed blessing. I'd left hundreds of dollars in equipment behind, but at least I was alive. My shower called to me. I stripped, threw my pants and underwear in the trash, then settled into the longest, most rewarding shower of my life. After drying, I threw on a Metallica t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I came back out to the living room and settled in to watch a movie. Horror was out. I knew I'd have nightmares for weeks about my ordeal. I decided to watch an episode of Wipeout. 3 episodes later, I found my eyelids fighting gravity and exhaustion. Heading to bed, I turned out the lights and stepped up to the living room window. Looking out over the lights of town, I sighed, seeing the trees of the park far in the distance and knowing I'd never visit there again. Before I turned toward my bedroom, something caught my eye. It was impossible. I rubbed my eyes to be sure. The monster was creeping out of the woods and coming straight toward my house. As I watched, it looked up and saw me. Our eyes locked. Mine full of fear, its full of menace. I ran through the house, making sure every door and window was locked. After that, I went to my bedstand and pulled out my snub-nosed .38, checking to make sure it was loaded, and grabbing a handful of extra bullets, shoving them in my pocket. Running back out to the living room, I looked out the window, but it was gone. Pressing my face against the glass, I searched the front yard, but it wasn't there. For an instant, I wondered if my imagination had been playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen window and looked into the backyard. It was dark, and I couldn't see much. Reaching for the light switch, I hesitated, not wanting to see it suddenly appear in front of me, but I had to know if this thing was real or not. I would rather that I was going crazy than ever see that thing again. Flicking on the light, I took a half step back. Nothing was there. I scanned the entire backyard, all the way to the woods that bordered my property. Nothing. I shrugged and was about to go to bed when I heard it. My foot stopped on the first step, and I turned back toward the door. Someone or something was scraping against the front door. Feeling like I was in a trance, I was drawn to the door. Leaning up to the peephole, I closed my eyes and breathed a silent prayer that nothing would be there. My prayers were answered. There was nothing out there. As tempted as I was to just accept this audible hallucination, my shaking hand reached for the doorknob. The distance between my hand and the door seemed to fade, like one of those scenes in a horror movie where the camera zooms in while going backward. I turned the knob and held my breath while opening the door. Nothing was there. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Looking around, the yard was empty, just the evening mist clinging to the lawn. My imagination had gotten the best of me. I turned to go back inside and saw the door and door frame had long scratches on it. My blood froze. It was real. It was here. It had tracked me down. As terror gripped me, I saw a flash of brown fur an instant before it charged me. In sheer desperation, I fell back into the door just as it hit the doorframe. Its antlers slammed into the doorframe, sending splinters flying as it struggled to get loose from the destroyed wood. I lay on the door, watching in grim fascination, stunned by the fact that it had missed gouging my eyes by a mere fraction of an inch. The doorway had saved me, the same doorway that was rapidly disappearing under the monster's onslaught. I regained myself and ran. As I darted through the living room somehow, I had the presence of mind to grab the house phone and dial 911 as I headed down the basement steps, slamming the door behind me. 911? What's your emergency? Came the lady operator's voice. I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me, I said, vaulting down the stairs. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me. Are you talking about a person? No. What do you not understand about the word monster? I shouted. All right, it's my duty to inform you that prank calls will be reported to the police and you could face charges. Fine, send the cops. Maybe they can fight off the monster long enough to put me in cuffs. The line disconnected. Son of a... I said, as I heard the monster stalking around inside the house. I squeezed myself into the far corner between the wall and the oil tank, and tried to be as quiet as possible. Barley breathing, I listened to its measured steps as it crept from room to room. The floorboards complained with loud creaks, telling me this thing weighed considerably more than me. I heard it turn toward the stairs and thought about making a run for the cellar door that led outside when my phone rang. Hello? I whisper-screamed, trying to be as quiet as possible. Is this the person who just called 911 about a monster? Yes. Who is this? There was a pause as I heard the footsteps change direction. I'm from another agency, he said. Could you describe the monster for me? So, you're from one of those 3-letter agencies that always say they don't spy on our phone calls? Could you describe the monster for me? It's huge, I whispered. At least 8 feet tall, covered in fur and wearing the fur of another animal over its shoulders. Oh, and it has antlers like a deer. I heard a sharp intake of air. Where is it? I gave him my address. I meant, where is it in the house? It's on the first floor and I'm in the basement, I whispered. But I think it's coming down here. Just then I heard the basement door open. Gotta go, I whispered, then hung up the phone. The basement stairs groaned under the weight. I hoped that the wood would collapse under the weight and it would fall, snapping its neck. No such luck. The stairs creaked as it continued to the bottom. I had to duck in this basement, so I was sure it was on all fours to keep from getting tangled in the rafters. My heart pounded. I struggled to keep my breathing quiet so I wouldn't give away my position. The chuffing of the monster's breathing was getting closer. I wanted to close my eyes, but had to know when it came close enough. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. Aiming it at the corner, I waited. The skeletal snout appeared, but I didn't shoot. The shot would just bounce off of bone. I wanted to hit something more vital and hoped that I might somehow survive. The rest of the bony skull made its appearance and went by without noticing me. Next came the neck and the rest of the body. I wasn't sure where this thing's vital organs were, so I held off, hoping that it might not notice me at all. Those hopes were dashed when it sniffed, then whipped around and stared right at me. I took that as a sign to shoot it in the chest. The gunshot was deafening, especially in such a closed space. My ears were ringing so loud I could barely hear the monster screaming and tearing my oil tank limb from limb, trying to get to me. I fired again, trying to hit any part of its body as oil flew from it, thrashing around. We were both covered in heating oil, and yet it still kept coming. 3 more shots didn't even slow it down. It was so close the muzzle of the gun was nearly touching it. I shoved the barrel in one of its eye sockets and pulled the trigger. The flame from the exploding gunpowder set the oil on fire. I don't know if it was that or the bullet bouncing around in its skull that made it shriek even louder. Flame engulfed its screaming form, making it look like a demon straight from hell. It ran out of the basement through the outside doors, bursting out into the open air and disappearing into the night. I was so relieved I didn't notice right away that I was on fire. The oil that had splashed on me had ignited when the monster caught fire. I tried to push my way out quickly, but the monster had shoved the tank closer to the wall, pinning me. The fire devoured the oil on my clothes and my bare skin, making me scream in agony as I tried in vain to get away from the fire. This was it. I would die this horrible, agonizing death, trapped in an inferno. The monster would get its revenge and not even know it. Maybe once it extinguished its own fire, it would come back and devour what was left of me, like a well-done steak. I must have been hallucinating. I could have sworn a cloud enveloped me just before I died. I woke in a white room with an annoying beeping sound that wouldn't stop. There was a smiling face sitting in the corner staring back at me, attached to a man I'd never met. "How are you feeling?" he said, stepping over to the hospital bed. "Am I dead?" I rasped. "Not yet," he chuckled. "It was close, though. If we hadn't gotten to you when we did, you would have been a shish kebab." I tried to lean up, but pain put me back in the bed. "Yeah. You're not going to be taking any hiking trips for a while," he said. "You've got burns all over your legs that'll need some time to heal." "I'm never going hiking again," I said. "Are you the guy I talked to on the phone?" "Yeah, do you mind telling me the rest of what happened?" he said, pulling out a pen and notepad. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "Since you saved my life, it's the least I could do." He pulled his chair over and got comfortable. "What happened to the monster anyway?" I said. He hesitated. "It got away, didn't it?" "Yeah," he said, lowering his head a little. "We lost the trail after it extinguished itself, but don't worry, we'll find it." I didn't comment on my opinion of the competency of government agencies out of respect for the man who saved my life, but suffice it to say, I wouldn't be sleeping very deeply once I got back home. "Where would you like me to start?" I said. "The beginning is always a good place."